Welcome to the Heart and Science podcast, where we talk about creative leadership with owners of agencies and firms in the creative business. And we talk about their methods, milestones, and mistakes. And this week, as always, joined by my amazing co-host, Arti Shah. So Arti, good to be with you. Look forward to another great conversation.
Always.
So this week, we are joined by Armando Azarloza, who is the principal and also as a co-founder of the Axis Agency, which is a Los Angeles-based strategic communications and marketing firm, but specifically doing multicultural and even more specifically in the Hispanic marketplace. Armando and I have been soft acquaintances, and we talk about it in the episode that we've tried to connect and have now recently gotten connected. And before that, he had a significant career with one of the larger global holding companies. And he's got a lot of interesting perspectives about having been at the big firm to having a relationship with that big firm and having a 90-10 ownership, and then recently buying out and owning it all with he and his partner. And so, Arti, for me, there's a couple of things that really stood out. The one that's just really most fascinating to me, and the concept that I really love, is this concept that they're creating a sponsorship versus mentorship culture within their firm. And when we talk a little bit about that, but I didn't know, with a little bit of reflection, if you have a sort of a thought and things that people should kind of keep an eye out for as they think about this sponsorship mentorship culture.
Yeah. So, I mean, sponsorship, mentorship, I think that's key. I think I first heard about that really around women in leadership and how women didn't need mentors within organizations. They needed sponsors. They needed somebody who would advocate and champion for them. Same thing. I've heard that around DEI, this idea of sponsorship versus just mentorship. Sponsorship is much more active participation in someone's career trajectory. And the other things that I would say to listen out for is some of these were small points, but they stuck with me. What he says about sort of the status around busyness and how busy should a founder be. And the second, of course, is the direction of multicultural marketing. Like, where's that going?
Yeah, and I love that, and we did a little discussion of in the business, on the business, where he got to talk about that busyness and his role. He got some interesting insights and perspectives that I think people can learn from. That multicultural piece, we talk about that, and I think he's certainly bullish on it in the future, but he sees a continued blurring of the lines, because I think over the years you've seen the blurring, and I think that blurry line continues to get more blurry over time.
Yeah, it's like the question of when, and again, I don't want to spoil too much. We can wait to keep some of this for our analysis, but really, I mean, when does multicultural become general market, and what will that distinction look like? And also, I mean, what multicultural means, obviously, in the context of his agency, we're looking at primarily Latino, Hispanic audiences. But even within that group, there's so many subgroups. And then also as our country continues to get more and more diverse, who else are we talking about when we talk about multicultural marketing?
Arti, one of the things we've added recently is this notion of heartbeats and science experiments. So I'd love to get some perspective on yours. There's two big things on my mind, and I'm looking forward to sharing those with you.
Yes, I know. I mean, you've had some big life changes happen this week. So mine may pale in comparison. Mine are they feel a little small, but I'm going to say them anyway because I think they're relevant. My beats. So my beat is something that I think really validates what we've been doing here at Heart and Science. It's an article I saw in Ad Age, and the headline was, something to the effect of, agency is the industry's latest dirty word. And the gist of it was there's this movement for creative agencies to sort of distance themselves from the traditional model, right? And part of that is they don't want to be bogged down with the overhead, the staffing expectations, and most importantly, hourly billing, right? Which has come up in a lot of our conversations. And this obviously resonates not only with the conversations we're having with entrepreneurs, but the conversations we've been having amongst ourselves about what needs to change with the model moving forward. And something that stood out to me as well is there was one agency that was calling themselves, there's things like studio, consultancy. I think we've all heard that, but they were calling themselves a creative solutions company. And the idea was they thought that categorization would be able to would free them from the hourly billing model. But, they were still caught by procurement and sort of taken back to the principal's office to fill out their time card. But I think it really shows that we're really onto something here when these conversations we're having.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things I think we should talk about almost at a more basic level is this distinction between agency and firm. I mean, I love some of the new vocabulary that people are using, but I just think even a basic, what's a firm versus what's an agency? That's probably more of the mainstream dichotomy without getting into the third or fourth tier of permutations of naming. So that's something to be very curious about.
And my experiment is really it's really simple. As you know, I've been watching a lot of Criterion Collection films. This past week it was His Girl Friday, which as a former journalist, I can't believe it has taken me this long to watch. But it's about the newspaper business from a very bygone era, and I was of course comparing that to today's. We're in this sort of media extinction level scenario with cuts and carnage everywhere. But also, I was just thinking about how resilient sort of the media voices have been, right? I mean, they seem to always find a new home, whether that's Twitter, whether that's TikTok, whether that's Substacks. So, as a former journalist, avid consumer of media, and someone who is acutely aware of how much the PR industry relies on sort of a thriving media climate, I've just been more intentional about experimenting and just sort of really engaging with new media models, whether that's, Jamel Bowie on TikTok, Katie Couric's, a wake up call, or being intentional about following the journalist tab on Blue Sky, the new top tier, as they call it.
Yeah. So that's excellent. And I love that you take that perspective. But a question I have back for you, what advice would you have for agency owners? And let me personalize it. So my question would be, Arthi, I've got enough to stay grace over keeping up on top of AI and changes in the newsroom today. Are you advocating that there's something that I could learn to allocate my diet to spend a little bit more time looking at the way it was?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to think about how you're defining your offerings and your capabilities, right? I mean, if you're still rooted in the world where the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal coverage is how your client, how you're sort of selling your services to clients, I think you need to really pay attention to where influence is really happening. And I think this goes to a question you and I have had, is like, how much do you need to be in the business versus, working on the business? And this is a debate for maybe another episode, but I mean, I think there's some degree of you have to be in the business. I think a CEO who your employees can look at and know that you could probably step in and do most of their jobs with some with some competency. I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, I think so. Great stuff. Good topic for a future date. So my heartbeat and my science experiment are a little bit of a mashup, kind of on the same topic. Well, first of all, yesterday, where we're recording this on a Thursday, but yesterday was the birth of my first granddaughter, and so I'm traveling in the hometown of my daughter and son-in-law. Got to be with them through the birth. It was a little bit bumpy, a little bit of a long labor. Baby came out a little bit small, so she's in NICU, so it's a little girl. So in some time with NICU, so the heartbeat literally is going down to NICU and putting my big hand, which is almost the length of her whole body, to put my hand on her chest, and the NICU nurse really encouraged pressure because that's where they came from, and as opposed to just sort of scratching your finger on their toe. And she said, really let them feel you. And doing that to feel her heartbeat was pretty emotional experiment or experience for me. The science experiment, and it's relevant for owners, ironically, is that's not my kid. And I've got to step back as a father to watch my daughter and son-in-law raise their child, and they're not, or may not, do it the way I would do it, and they're going to do things differently. And as I sit on the brink of transitioning out of the leadership of my firm and ultimately selling my firm, that's not my firm, and they may not do things the way I would do things, and I need to experiment with a new way to say, when my daughter was young, I'd say, damn it, stop that. And I don't do that anymore. I say something different to a 25-year-old woman. And now as a mother. And so I'm experimenting to, how do I share perspectives? How do I share observations that are not demands or demands or well, this is how I would have done it. And I'm also experimenting with that with Stephanie at our firm of how do I share? Well, that's not the way I do it. How can I share that? So I'm experimenting with different modalities of those conversations.
What a beautiful way to put this. First of all, Bill, congratulations again. What an
Thank you.
exciting
It's been fun
chapter.
to share with you, by the way. You've been a part of it over the past couple of days.
Yeah. And I mean, and even just sort of hearing you talk about it and seeing your face, I'm sort of taken back to, those early days when I when I was a new mom, and then making that connection between that, letting go as a grandparent, giving your daughter space to kind of parent the way she wants to, and how that translates to entrepreneurship, especially if you do have an exit that you're eyeing, and knowing when you can step back, or even if you're trying to implement a succession plan, right? If you're trying to bring on someone who you ultimately want to take over, knowing that like they may not parent the same way that you parented. And a lot's changed in the world too, right? I had a conversation this morning with some professors actually at a communications school. And, so much of it was rooted in back in our day. And, I mean, I think just look at the last 5 years. I mean, our world was almost unrecognizable to our 2018, 2019 selves.
Yeah. Just the last thing, and then I want to get to the episode with Armando is that, through the power of Instagram or whatever the social algorithm is, I may have said or typed something about grandparenting or whatever, but somehow I got this comedian with a bit, short thing on Instagram talking about, grandparents nowadays are kind of like a former employee at a big company, 30 years removed, coming back and not expecting to take any sort of additional job training. So it's the first job I had at the retail store that I worked at, 30 years ago, is that I could just walk right back into that job 30 years later, and now as a grandparent. And well, this is the way I used to do it, and this is the way we used to do it. And the industry's changed, and obviously parenting's changed. And so he does a much better job of telling the story than I do. But it's quite funny that I probably need a little bit more training, just as if I had left a company 30 years ago. I probably need a little bit of training to do whatever the company does now.
Very well said. Very well said.
All right. Well, with that, another well said, another wonderful guest that we have. So I'm excited to have the conversation with Armando. Well, Armando, just sort of the funny story to get this started. You and I sort of met virtually some years ago when I was out in LA. A mutual friend introduced us, and then through a series of numerous trials and errors, we never really physically connected, but kind of stayed in contact over the years. And it's been nice, and sort of the power of both Facebook and LinkedIn and other technologies, and then have been able to connect sort of more formally here recently. So welcome to the podcast. Arthi and I are certainly glad you're here and looking forward to a great conversation with you. As we get started, what would be, if you could go back to the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey with the Access Agency, is there one bit of advice after the years of success and the years of experience that you have? Is there one bit of advice that you would give the new owner, Armando, that you've gleaned and learned as an agency owner? And we'll talk about how you got there in a second. But is there one bit of advice you give yourself as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as an entrepreneur, I think there's a couple of things that I would really look at. One is to kind of stake out some ground that is unique to you and to your business objective, rather than trying to be, something for everybody. Try to stake out some ground that actually you can own, that you can really kind of, you can manage on your own without having to bring in too many other people. And I think the next thing that I've learned, and this goes back to my corporate days as well, is to kind of look beyond the obvious. If you simply rely on what's in front of you, you're probably not gonna realize the full growth and full potential of your agency and your journey, if you will. So kind of look beyond the obvious and really try to stake out some ground early on in order to become an expert at what you're doing.
And is multicultural that ground that you've staked, or is it even further refined than that as you sort of whittle it down and kind of go in deeper?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the first hill that we took, frankly, was, multicultural, right? We staked that out for Interpublic when I was with Interpublic, and we said this is a hill that we want to try to go up, and we try to figure it out. I think the second part of it, though, is once you're up that hill, what do you do? you kind of look beyond, and you got to look around and go, hey, what else can I do to be able to expand my position? And so whether you're doing advertising or marketing or communications or social media or production, whatever it is that you're doing, try to look beyond just the obvious and to try to diversify the business as much as you can and as quickly as possible. Because I think a lot of mistakes that young entrepreneurs make is they keep on that same path for so long, and they kind of die on the vine, if you will, right? So you need to be looking for diversification from day one to be able to support all aspects of your business.
What about when whatever area you stake out, when that changes, right? I mean, you look at as the demographics of the U.S. are changing as rapidly as they are. I know I've heard many people ask the question is, when does multicultural marketing just become marketing? Is that a question that you've had to ask yourself as you've grown your business?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's an insightful question, because I think the multicultural market, it's just like the general market, is evolving every single day, right? So, I remember 10 years ago, digital was just something that we were kind of testing out and figuring out exactly what that was really going to mean from an overall marketing perspective. I've always said we would need to make multicultural part of our multicultural be part of our advertising DNA, right? So it's got to be part of everything that we do from day one. It can't be just an add-on. It needs to be part of the overall discussion from day one. So I think, I ask myself that question all the time. And with the language patterns, for example, it complicates things. 20 years ago when I first started doing this, it was a lot easier because Spanish was really the vehicle that we were on, and our distinction was the ability to communicate in Spanish and in language. Today, with the Hispanic market in particular being about 50% Spanish dominant, 50% bilingual, that's kind of been taken off the table, if you will. And so we got to come up with and kind of draft a new approach, a new path. And to us, it's been more about culture, making sure that we represent the cultural values and the traditions and the history of our community in ways that are unique and authentic, as opposed to simply relying on language. To me, today, language is never a strategy. It's just a vehicle. Just like we choose radio, or we choose digital, or we choose a community event, language in many ways is that as well. It's never a strategy. It's just a vehicle to communicate the strategy.
We talk about culture with other owners, and you talk about, and maybe in a little bit of a different way than you just used it specifically, but talking about within firms, how do you instill an authentic and real culture in something that is attractional to talent, because we want to hire talent, and we can certainly remain attractional with comp and benefits and things like that. But there's also culture is a part of that. So talk a little bit about both cultures, the cultural distinction of that Hispanic marketplace. I'm assuming you hire a number of bilingual speakers that come from that culture. And then as well about how you guys at the Access Agency are building culture, creating culture that's unique and special to you, influenced by the meta culture that you're serving.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you touched on it, Bill. I mean, I think, from day one, we decided that we wanted to be the navigators of that culture for our clients, right? So if you're actually going to be one of the navigators, you better be part of the culture. You need to understand the language, the traditions, the history, the authenticity of being, part of this journey that we're on as Hispanic Americans. And so the people that we hire are bicultural, they're bilingual, they live in their communities, they're active in their communities, and that's how we actually represent that back to our clients. I think that at the end of the day, we also see ourselves as champions, or as advocates, as evangelists, if you will, for our communities, for the marketplace, for our families. And so it's easy for us to kind of wake up in the morning, evangelize the market, because we are part of that market. I've often said to my clients, you need to be able to convince me that the product or the service or the company is valued in the community. Convince me, and you're going to convince the rest of my community. I'm a representative of my community. I'm active in my community. And so that's really the kind of the culture that we've set up in the agency is, if you want to work for Access, and you want to run multicultural campaigns, you've got to be able to be a part of the community. You have to be active in the community to be able to represent that tradition and that culture.
So let me ask you a question about the nature of the work and sort of how you get the business. When I was covering this industry, I know I would talk to a lot of the big agencies, and it sounds like you had a relationship with Interpublic or IPG, which we should talk about. Actually, do you want to just give our listeners a little bit of context about your relationship with IPG before I ask my question?
Sure. Yeah. So I joined IPG. Actually, I joined True North Communications. Bill, you might remember True North.
Yeah. Wow.
I joined True North in the early 2000s, right before they actually merged with Interpublic. And I was running kind of a West Coast operation for a firm called Bozell Sawyer Miller, which was more kind of issues management and strategic communications work. It wasn't at all multicultural. It wasn't at all marketing. It was really about issues and strategic communications. At one point, I decided, hey, one of the gaps that we see in our communication world is that we're not doing enough in Spanish. And so I started kind of evangelizing, if you will, the need to put stuff in Spanish. And you might remember in the year 2001, 2002, the Hispanic market was just kind of becoming part of the reality, right? It was the boom. It was the time where people noticed, my God, there's a lot of Hispanics here, and the market is growing. And so I think that was one of the catalysts. So I actually think of myself as kind of a two-time entrepreneur, because I had to be an entrepreneur within IPG in order to be able to actually get the support to be able to launch a practice focused on Hispanic marketing. And then ultimately, some 20 years later, when I separated from IPG, I had to be my own entrepreneur because I was on my own. I was still tethered to the IPG world in some ways or another, but I had to go out there and kind of sow my own fields. And so I see myself as kind of a two-time entrepreneur, which I think adds to kind of my multi-dimensional perspective of how to run a company and how to grow it.
And so as you're, so how do you get most of your business? I remember there was a time where a lot of the big agencies didn't necessarily have a robust multicultural division or team. They actually relied on partnering with agencies like yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the multicultural agencies, I know they relied on sort of the big agencies to sort of feed them business. And a big downside of that was a lot of the strategy was decided, right? Before they were sort of brought on board, and then they were brought on board to sort of, take this campaign and make it like applicable to a multicultural audience. Do you find that that's still the rhythm of how it works, or has that changed?
I think we're starting to see some changes already. I mean, I don't know that it's actually, fully changed. I mean, you're 100% right. I mean, when I first showed up in this business, the cake was already baked and they just wanted me to kind of put the sprinkles on top. And I always used to say to people, hey, an English market focused ad, even though it's in Spanish, is still an English market focused ad. If you really want to genuinely connect with the Hispanic community and consumer, you gotta start at a different place to be able to come up with those insights that are really gonna create authenticity and really kind of create passion for a product or a brand or a service. So we're constantly on that struggle to try to educate people about the need for us to be involved in the baking of the cake as opposed to simply the decorating of the cake. And today I see more and more companies following that kind of direction and allowing us to kind of help bake that cake with the proper ingredients so that it becomes, something that really is works for us. But at the same time, there are still, a lot of companies that just figure, well, we'll pick up the multicultural audience, the Hispanic audience with what we're doing in the general market. And with the fact that more Hispanics are speaking English than ever before, somebody believes that that's an easier thing to do today than it ever was. And maybe it is. But you're still only talking to 50% of the market if you only do that, because 50% of the market is still Spanish dominant. And so you're ignoring a huge population that has a lot of disposable cash, a lot of influence in their communities, and a tremendous opportunity to grow your bottom line. You're just ignoring them if you don't do something in Spanish and properly in culture.
Well, as you look downrange, which, one of the themes of all great entrepreneurs are looking ahead, the next chapter, certainly beyond the next quarter, the next year. So I want to put two things you just said, and we sort of chuckled that Hispanic marketing just becomes marketing, or when does that line stop and start? And then you just talked about this unique cake that you want to bake. And so we want to bake this unique cake. Which side is it? Do we need to have a really good, authentic Hispanic cake, or is there just this collision that all marketing is going to serve all of the different audiences? And then as you look long range for the firm, do you see the niche getting bigger, the niche getting maybe smaller but deeper? So what do you see downrange for the need for the unique and specialized excellent service that you guys are providing?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I look 5, 6 years down the line, I see a market that is much more fully integrated into the general market. I mean, I think just to suggest that it's not is unrealistic. I mean, it's moving in that direction. We've been seeing it move in that direction, and I think it's only accelerating. However, having said that, there isn't an end to being Hispanic, right? There is the constant refreshing of language. With immigration, there's a constant refreshing of values and traditions, stories that people bring from wherever their country of origin to the United States. And so that journey is not like, when you think of the immigration of the 1800s into the United States. I mean, people left Europe, they came to the United States, and they simply wanted to assimilate into society. They even, in many cases, stopped speaking their language. Well, that's not really happening with the Hispanic market. There's still, like I said, 50% of the market is Spanish dominant. And even if you're not a Spanish dominant Hispanic, you are bilingual. You are still speaking the language at home with your parents, with your grandparents, with your aunts and uncles. And so there's a constant refreshing of culture and tradition that happens in the market today. So is the market becoming much more kind of general market? Yes, but that doesn't resolve the question of how are you going to fully engage that market if you don't actually do something in culture that speaks to them and captures their imagination, and that brand authenticity. So the market is going to evolve. It's going to change. It's going to be more multicultural. Marketing is going to be marketing. But if you're a good marketer, you're only going to put out stuff out there that resonates with that segment of the market.
So I think on that note, so let's think a little bit about your competitive advantage, right? And sort of establishing that competitive advantage in the marketplace. I mean, it's given, where, what your expertise is. I mean, you all have a dimension and insight sort of into the complexity of like the US Hispanic consumer in a way that other agencies do not. And one of the frustrations that we've seen when I've been on the awards judging side is how lazy some of the some of the audience insights can be, right? I've seen entire campaigns that are targeted towards busy moms. like that's the whole demographic. So as multicultural marketing becomes more integrated with the general market, how are you going to retain that competitive advantage of having that unique insight into US, Hispanic US consumers?
Yeah. I mean, and we spend a lot of time understanding the dynamics of the marketplace, how it's changing, how it's evolving. We're only as smart as the research that's in front of us, frankly. So we're constantly looking at research segmentation. We're looking at demographic studies to really kind of have our finger on the pulse of where the market is moving. Years ago, I started talking about the shift from language to culture, right? So I saw that as something that was going to be taking place, and I felt that it was going to only accelerate in the future. Well, I was thankfully correct that it has accelerated, but that doesn't remove the fact that by being in culture, you're able to communicate with that particular audience. So that was something that we discovered years ago, and we started saying you have to be in culture versus in language. And I think maybe we were one of the first agencies that kind of started talking about that in those terms. And I think today it's still reality. I'll give you one example of what that looks like in real time. Nintendo was a client of mine for many years, and we did a lot of work for them for their Wii products, right? Remember the Wii products that people could play sports, and there was all sorts of other kind of applications associated with it. One of the things that we discovered as part of the research that we did was that there are two segments of that market audience that we wanted to communicate with. One were the kids that were largely playing the game. And second, it was the parents who were actually buying the product for the kids. And so we looked at that and said, okay, well, how do we communicate with each of these different audiences? Well, clearly, for the young kids that are mostly English speaking, they're born in the United States, they're going to American schools, you're going to be talking to them in English. So our campaign for those kids to create enthusiasm for the game was largely done in English, and it was largely done with a lot of celebrity voices that were kind of, this bicultural Hispanic. But then on the other side of the coin, for parents that were buying the product, they were much more Spanish dominant. And we found that out through the research. So the campaign for them was largely done in Spanish. So we had the same campaign with the same ultimate goal to sell these products, to create family opportunities and moments in entertainment for the family. But we had to do it in two different languages because, again, that was the vehicle that we had to use in order to communicate with those two segments. So that's an example of how we've been able to kind of like adjust our strategy based on the market conditions that are in front of us.
and obviously you're bullish and you see opportunity moving forward in that. With it, considering all the disruptions that we have going on right now, there's going to be great opportunity in that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think there's more cultural awareness today than ever before. I think people are kind of rediscovering their ethnicity, where they come from, the stories of their families, and there's a great amount of pride in that, right? So I'm a Cuban American, right? So I've grown up with stories about Cuba in the 50s and the 60s, and I live in California where there's significant Mexican American community that brought their own stories through their own patterns of immigration into the country. So I think it's a matter for us. It's a matter of kind of storytelling around those kind of cultural points. And that provides me, I think, with a great outlook in terms of where the market is going, because that's not going to change. The language can change. The people that come from Mexico, or the people that come from South America, or that come from the Caribbean, those patterns might change. But at the end of the day, they bring to the United States stories that we can then use for marketing opportunities.
So you mentioned research, and I know you guys do a really good job of kind of leading with the research and lead with the insights from the culture, but you also lead with the research. You and I share sort of bloodlines from politics and getting to the agency world. I'm assuming that penchant for research was born in politics at some level. So talk a little bit about that journey and sort of the link up between politics and marketing, politics and communication. I see a lot of overlap, but I also see a lot of difference between the two journeys and two careers.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's my perspective, but you might share this. I don't know how you could be a good communicator and not have worked in politics. I mean, it's one of these things where, it's the bread and butter of political communications is messaging, segmentation, research. If you don't have the ability to do that and to really see the audience in multiple different ways and be able to attach a message and a vehicle to each of these different segments of the marketplace, I don't really know how you actually drive a brand in today's market. Yes, we have a mass media market. We know that. But I think today more than ever, people identify in communities. And if you don't figure out how to penetrate, how to engage that individual community, I don't know how successful you're going to be. And in politics, that was politics 101. It's all about local politics. It's all about how you engage that particular community. How do you give people enough of an embrace, enough of education, and then ultimately enough engagement to mobilize them to vote? It's the same thing in corporate America with the product. I flip a candidate for a product, and I've got the same philosophy in place, and it's worked very well for us. And I think I appreciate your thoughts about, Billy, how we use research, because that is the fundamental part of how we approach everything. Is we start with research and we go from there.
So it sounds like you're really involved in your clients and in the work that you do for them. I'm curious, how would you say you divide your time between working on the business versus working in the business?
Have you heard that?
Yeah,
before you go there, have you heard that distinction in years past?
Yeah.
For
sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
We're unsure. Sometimes we think I think everybody knows it, and we had mentioned it once or twice and said, "Oh, that's a novel concept." And so we're just checking in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think at the end of the day, what I'm quote paid for, if you will, is to kind of look beyond today and look towards tomorrow, right? So it's like, again, look beyond the obvious that I mentioned at the very beginning of our talk, right? And that's what I do. I try to engage with my clients when necessary, when I'm called in, especially when it's any kind of a issues type campaign that we want to use. That's obviously my background. But you gotta look beyond today. You gotta look and see where everything is heading. So I spend most of my time kind of in business development, in kind of overall strategic positioning, and probably 20 to 25% of my time in client work. And that seems to work very, very well. Years ago, I had an opportunity to meet with one of the founders of one of the large audio streaming companies. And I was very impressed that he had accepted my invitation for lunch. And when I met with him, I said, "Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. I know you're really busy." And he goes, "Yeah, I'm not that busy." And I looked at him and I go, "Well, that's interesting. You're not that busy. You're running one of the largest audio streaming companies in the world." He goes, "Yeah, I've got people that can run it. I need to look beyond that. So I want to hear the voices of different people from different places that can offer me new ideas." And that's where I spend most of my time. And I thought that was just enlightening. I really thought that was, what a great kind of perspective to have as a CEO. Not to be caught on the mundane day-to-day operational pieces, but to actually look beyond that, to see where you want to go and what you want to open up and what kind of fields you want to harvest.
So where are you getting fed as an entrepreneur? Where are you having those conversations that you had with him that feed you as a leader and an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I talked to a lot of research people. I talked to a lot of media people. I mean, I think the media people, provide me with really good insights in terms of kind of the overall media landscape that help kind of in my head, kind of figure out exactly how people are consuming messaging. I spend a lot of time talking to students. One of the things I like to do is to go talk to high school and college students. I've taught, classes at USC and at UCLA. And even though they look to me as the expert in marketing, I kind of look to them as kind of the experts in terms of culture, in terms of where things are headed, that kind of connection to pop culture and to the nuance of today. And so, everywhere I can get an opportunity to sit with somebody and talk to them and figure out, pick their brain about where the market is going, in and outside of politics, in and outside of corporate brands, I do it because I think it's a learning experience.
But what are we going to do about COVID, work from home, succession planning, conflict with a partner? Where do you either vent or learn those types of that are just generic, almost leadership questions? How do you get fed?
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of communication with a lot of folks that are more senior than I am, if you will. People at Interpublic and at other larger agencies that I have good relationships with, that I talk to and kind of get their perspective and ask them the same questions you just asked. What do you do with COVID? What do you do with return to work policy? What do you do with vacation pay and all that stuff? So I get those relationships that I have in place. I think have been really very, very beneficial for me because I get to learn from other people's perspectives. And, my world is this world, but the people I'm talking to have a much larger, world in front of them. And I think that their perspective that they share with me is very applicable to everything I do. So I learn from them every single day.
I'm building on this question. How do you keep up with your competitive landscape? And I ask this because I was always surprised when I would talk to founders, with agencies that were, say, under 10 million. And I would sometimes ask them, who's your competitive, what's your competitive landscape? And they would oftentimes look up, right? And they would want to, position themselves with some bravado and say, oh, well, I'm a $5 million agency, but I only go up against Weber, or I only go up against Edelman. I never see other boutiques. And it actually, and while I think the idea was they wanted to kind of, position themselves as kind of punching above their weight, it sort of came off to me as a little bit naive about their standing in the marketplace. Yeah. And so I do think it's important as a founder, and I'm just curious if you think it's important as a founder to really keep your pulse on who your competitors are, what are they doing, and you can also and are you also aspirational in terms of we would consider it a compliment if we were in a pitch up against this agency or an agency of this size.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I find myself competing against larger agencies and smaller agencies. I mean, in this kind of marketplace today, there's a lot of great freelancers and contractors and independent consultants that have come out of nowhere and are actually grabbing good pieces of business. I think at the end of the day, Artie, I mean, I might surprise you by saying this. I don't really look at my competition that much. Because I don't want to take my eye off the ball in terms of what I know I can provide my clients and the expertise that I can provide. Doesn't mean that I know it all. I certainly don't. But I'm also honest in terms of being able to only do what I'm able to do. And just because I have an agency, I look at an agency that's got these great, media planning skills. Oh my God, I want to get that. Well, maybe I do want to get that. But do I have the resources? Do I have the ability to get that? I'm just not focused on that. And I'm not playing that game. I'd rather just do what I do, put my head down. I think we provide really great strategy and analysis and creative output. And we've been very, very successful. The nice thing about being in multicultural is that, in some ways, the world is a little bit smaller than it is for, big general market agencies, right? And so there's fewer people out there that do what I do. And I think that I'm very comfortable in going toe to toe with any agency with any kind of multicultural expertise. I know that we can provide their better insights.
Okay, I'm going to ask one follow-up to this,
Yeah.
mostly because we are in the thick of awards right now, and there are award competitions happening every single day. And pretty much all of my clients are asking me, who are we up against? What's your take on agency X or agency, Y? What are our odds of winning? And so they seem really attuned to who, their competitive landscape. Are you saying that you were worried that if you were that attuned to who your competitors are, that it would actually be a distraction and maybe sort of pull you away from sort of what your core focus is?
100%. Yeah, I don't want to be distracted with the conversation about, I want to have a paid media practice, or I want to have, I want to be an event planner, and that's a conference planner. It's not worthwhile to me to spend my time thinking about that, because it's not necessarily my path. I'd rather just put my head down and ignore what the competition is doing and just simply provide the best level of service that I can to my clients. And it's honestly, it's proven valuable to me over the last 20 years by not engaging in the I wish I was this, I wish I was that game, and just simply do the work that I know we can do.
So what's in that context? Is there a vertical that's next for you? Maybe not vertical, but is there a discipline or a skill that the Access agency you need to pick up? You mentioned media planning, you mentioned a couple of different things, but is there a low-hanging fruit, and that if you did go reach for that could create some growth and expansion if you're out in front of you?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I don't know that if there's, a revenue stream or an opportunity out there that I haven't, kind of prepared myself to go after. I use paid media as an example, but we've got paid media capabilities, of course. The point is, I don't necessarily have something that what I really want to kind of focus on is, how do you create a collective of smaller independent agencies that don't have the resources necessarily go after these huge opportunities, right? Artie, you talked about this agency that goes against Weber or goes against Edelman. A lot of times, we don't have the ability to do that because we don't have the level of investment and resources to be able to put against that kind of a pitch, which is, it can be a very expensive proposition. So I'm actually thinking about, how do we provide a collective kind of mindset for smaller agencies to work together. So it's not really a holding company, but more of a collective of agencies that can kind of come together, share insights, share resources, and be able to really position yourself to go after these much larger opportunities that are out there today. Because again, from a multicultural perspective, there aren't many, big RFPs out there for multicultural, right? So I've got to look at the market and say, okay, what general market opportunity is out there that I can actually go after, because multicultural is an important segment of that particular audience. And so that's how I'm trying to kind of position my agency for the future, is that, yes, we do multicultural, but we do marketing with a focus on diversity and multicultural segments. There are other agencies that are doing the same thing. So how do we kind of combine our resources in a collective way to be able to go after these much larger opportunities that are in front of us?
I'd love to ask you a follow-up question to that, because, I've seen many of these sort of independent agency networks sort of forged, over the years, and, with varying levels of success. And the biggest sort of criticism that I've heard when I've talked to folks on the client side, when they've engaged sort of an independent sort of, collective of agencies, is consistency, right? Like quality control. So if you were to put something like this together, and how would you ensure quality control and that the client would get, the same caliber of work that, the Access agency is providing, that, your affiliate partner would also be providing?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the main issues that we have to deal with is the quality of work. How do you guarantee that quality is gonna cut across every single work stream, every single client opportunity? And I think that's really on us to be able to help guide that process. There's always going to be some sort of a lead agency in this kind of collective, and so the lead agency is going to have kind of the senior counsel involvement to be able to ensure that it's all consistent and that the work product is actually good and meaningful. So that's one of the big challenges. But it's kind of the same challenge in some ways that we have with the work that we do for multiple clients, right? I work in healthcare, I work in transportation, I work in consumer products, automotive. I need to ensure that the quality of work across all those industries is consistent for our agency. And so we put in certain, processes in place to ensure that level of consistency cuts across. I see it the same way working from agency to agency.
And why would you start a new network when there's ones that already exist out there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's one out there that exists that is really something that I'm, intrigued by. There have been a couple of kind of multicultural networks set up in the last couple of years. Some more successful than others, but none really, I think, at the level that they wanted to reach. And I think that we have an opportunity perhaps to be able to do that. In today's world, I think with so many smaller agencies that are looking for these resources, we can provide an invaluable kind of insight, research, planning, creative production that agencies, frankly, just don't have the ability to support.
And in that, just staying here, those would be mostly independents as you're envisioning this. They would be independent, small owns. So my experience in trying to stand that up, because we were just doing crisis and we were with Kith, I ran into two things. I ran into egos and assholes. And it was less about the ability or the capacity or the consistency, Arthy's great point, but it was about the people, about the leaders. And maybe I picked bad partners, but those two factors, the E and the A, is really sort of drove the partnership. And so how do you lead and manage for that with picking partners?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that I would do is you don't dominate the room. At the end of the day, you let people kind of manage their business. You provide insight, guidance, wherever possible. But you don't dominate. I've been in rooms, certainly, with general market agencies, that they want to dominate even multicultural marketing. They know more about Hispanics.
Well, that's back to baking the cake. They want you to put some sprinkles.
Yeah.
We'll have you translate the press release. Just sit back for a little bit.
Yeah, right. So if I was going to do this, I wouldn't bake the cake and say, okay, agencies, you guys just sprinkle the icing on top of the cake. I'd have them involved in the process from day one, because that's how you create true partnership. I mean, one of the feathers in my cap that I'm really proud of is that the people that I've worked with over the years have been with me for a long, long time. And I have great retention with my staff. Very few people leave. And some people leave and then come back a couple of years later. And I think that's probably a testament, not just to me, but to my management team, because we're very invested in our people. We're invested in the ideas that they bring forward. I've always said, I don't need to be able to direct every single piece of marketing that comes out of our agency. I want to let people be creative. I want them to explore that creativity. If they need guidance, I'm always there to provide that guidance and support. But I'm not going to dictate for you every single word, every single line, every single image that you put into a spot, because that's me doing it, and I don't want to do it. I want everybody to do it with consensus.
Yeah. So Arthy, this is something we've talked about in the past. I'm curious your take on it. So Armando, we've talked about retention, and we've talked about it in the context of, small, maybe medium-sized firms, and growth is important. And obviously retention is important when it comes to money. You just got to pay people. You got to pay a competitive wage because people are going to go do something else. But what I advocate is that's not the only lever that an owner can pull. They can pull they can pull culture, they can pull experience, opportunity, things that you just talked about that. Talk about retention. And I know you should be proud of that track record that you have. There are some people that solve that by just throwing money at it. Talk about that and comp. Talk about comp among your team and that lever and how you manage and lead against that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I don't typically lead with money. That's one of the things I've always counseled young people: never go chase the money. Chase the opportunity, chase the chance to do some interesting, rewarding work for a great client. And I think at the end of the day, my view has always been, I run a very kind of flat type of organization. There isn't a lot of hierarchy in my organization. An account executive that works for me is as valuable as a senior vice president. I listen to that account executive as much as I listen to a senior vice president. In fact, a lot of times I listen to that account executive much more, because they provide me a fresh perspective versus the SVP that has been in the business for many years and might be kind of entrenched in a point of view. So I actually look to the young people a lot more. But I think my view of culture and an agency and retention is all about investing in people, not from a monetary perspective, but from a professional perspective. I want to see them grow. I want to see them advance in their career. I want to see them run campaigns by themselves with the proper level of support. I want them to see them make decisions. I don't need to be second guessing every single decision. I don't want to do that. I'm not a micromanager. It's worked very well for me to just simply look for the right person, empower that person, give him or her the tools to be able to do the work. And that creates a rationale for somebody wanting to stay here. One thing that we've dealt with, since COVID is people working from home. I've never forced people to come into the office. I felt that was probably not the smartest decision because, not that I don't want to see an office full of people. I, of course, do. People thrive on people. But my view was if people want to be able to work from their home or if they want to work from, some other spot in the world, as long as the work is done, as long as there's communication, as long as there's a good level of engagement with clients, I don't really care where you are. It's not about the commute. It's about communication. So if you stay in communication with me and work and productivity is at the same level as it was when we were all in the office, I'm very happy to accept that environment. And I think that has really created a nice opportunity for my employees to go explore and invest and to kind of find themselves in different places that they find interesting and I think rewarding.
Can I ask sort of how, there's this sort of false dichotomy, right, between being completely remote and then being in the, office like the old days where you're, everyone's just kind of siloed at their desks with headphones on. And I think where most, it seems like based on the research, where most people are landing is something in between that. And by that, I don't mean hybrid work. I mean coming together for collaboration, for, maybe creative ideation. But I think the key is with intentionality, right?
Right.
So I'm curious. So I guess a two-part question is, how do you sort of design and sort of, cultivate these moments where your staff can come together and thrive on each other, with purpose? Mm-hmm. Well, I guess let's answer that question first, and then I'll ask my second part.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think one of the things we've done is when we do bring people together, we make a day out of it, right? So we make it a learning experience. So it's not just coming to the office for that kind of performative type of I'm in the office perspective. You're in the office, and I'm going to bring in somebody from a media rep from one of the media companies. I'm going to bring in a researcher. I'm going to bring in a celebrity that's going to have lunch with us, and that person is going to kind of lunch and learn type of experience. And that I think has really driven much of the excitement to come back into the office because people are learning from that experience as opposed to simply just having to sit down at a chair in front of a computer.
What's the cadence of that, Armando? How often is that happening? That unique experience?
We do that. Yeah, we do that about once a month.
Okay.
Once a month. We just did it a couple of weeks ago. We had somebody talk to us about AI and how to use the proper prompts to be able to get what you want from AI. There was a kind of a session on voiceover and how you can get AI to actually do voiceover in the proper tone and the proper language. Things that are just kind of coming out now from an AI perspective, and we sat around and we talked about it for like 2 hours. And so people came in the office because they were going to learn something that was going to make them better communicators at the end of the day. It wasn't just about being in the office.
So that's basically the second part of my question, right? It sounds like autonomy is a big sort of part of your culture and sort of giving your employees that. So how do you balance that with sort of making sure a new employee, whether they're junior or senior, sort of are, learn sort of the Access agency way?
Yeah. So that's another good question. I'm a big supporter of mentorship, but I'm a bigger supporter of sponsorship. I think that we need to flip a little bit how we look at that and say, okay, you're a new employee coming into my company. You're going to have somebody within my company that's been here for a few years. It's going to be your sponsor. And that person is going to be responsible for the first year of your professional development at our agency. So you can get mentorship from anybody in the agency, but you're going to have one sponsor that's going to kind of help you, take you, hold your hand through the process and be invested in your own success. So that's one of the things that we do from day one is you find a sponsor who is going to be able to hold your hand through that process and really help guide you in the agency life.
Yeah. So it's if you follow sort of the addiction world, mentorship and sponsorship comes from, there's a theme of that through addiction. And I heard someone in AA share me that my mentor taught me to drink, my sponsor taught me to stop. And so mentorship only gets you so far in a positivity context. A sponsor has a little bit more accountability for red light and green light and yellow lights.
Yeah.
Your mentor doesn't do that. So I love that distinction between sponsorship and mentorship. Yeah. It's a broader, it's a bigger job description. Sponsorship is bigger job description.
And to your point, I mean, the sponsor is going to be able to, should be able to tell you, hey, you shouldn't do this. You should go the other way. Versus a mentor that is, their scope is a little bit more, is less, it's more limited to a particular function or a particular, service that you're involved in. So yeah, the sponsorship idea has really been very successful for us. And I think it's one of the reasons why we have, great retention at the agency.
Yeah. So what else is there as you're talking to other entrepreneurs, and we're trying to identify kind of what's the basket that people can do for retention to get there? Because we do hear stories of, I lost my best person because, and fill in the blank was the because. We've had some people say to us, yeah, we lost someone, but if they don't want to be here, screw them. Basically, Artie, I think it's kind of what we basically heard was screw them. If they don't want to be here, so be it. So what else, if you're looking in here and we're trying to create sort of a basket of options and a basket of resources. So we've got this sort of sponsorship responsibility. We've got obviously some comp. We've got autonomy, independence, the way you do creativity. What else is in that basket as we look at building and creating long-term teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to touch on this again on the sponsorship idea, I mean, one of the things that I try to do is I try to get our kind of middle management folks invested in each individual employee, right? So beyond the sponsorship, just the idea that if that account executive or senior account executive leaves the agency, you as an account supervisor or as an account director are going to be in a difficult situation because that person is no longer going to be there. So you better get invested in why that person is at that job and make sure that they're happy doing that job, because at the end of the day, it's going to make your life a lot easier. So it's not just on me to be able to kind of, instill that. It's on middle management, which is where they frankly, most of the time that, the entry-level folks are spending with middle management, not senior management. So I got to get middle management involved in that journey from day one. And we've done that, I think, quite successfully. And then, of course, senior management has the same responsibility with middle management. So my SVPs have to make sure that my account directors, my account soups, that they're all happy and they're satisfied and they feel rewarded, because at the end of the day, if they leave, then your job is going to become much more difficult. And so if we look at it that way, as opposed to simply everybody's out for themselves, you create culture in the agency, you create stewardship, and you create, I think, a viable environment where people can see success.
What about transparency? How much transparency do you feel is necessary, and what do your employees ask for?
Let me refine that. It's about finances, how you're doing, how you're not doing, compensation levels. Talk about just all that.
Yeah.
I think that maybe we communicate a little too much, to be honest, at times. We are very transparent with financials. Every time we have a staff meeting, once a month, we will have a good 15-minute discussion on the finances. So everybody in my agency knows, where what we're doing right and where we're falling short, and everybody is invested in that journey. And that's one of the things that one of my mentors, Andy Polanski at Weber Shandwick, taught me from day one. He was very transparent with the numbers. He didn't have any problem sharing numbers with senior management. And so I've taken kind of a page out of that book and really used it, at my agency. So everybody knows what the finances are. Everybody knows when we have to tighten our belts. Everybody knows when things are good and, we've got a little extra cash to be able to do events or different functions. So that is day one. Everybody's invested in the agency.
And just to clarify, is it the senior management or everyone at the agency?
Everybody.
Everyone.
Okay.
Have you had it bite you? Have you had you bite you in the butt at all? Being that open?
No, it hasn't. I mean, I had those concerns, to be honest with you. I mean, I thought, okay, if I tell people things are, fantastic and we're making more money than we ever made, people are going to, hey, well, how about raises and bonuses and that kind of stuff?
Well, is that part of the transparency? Like if you say, hey, we've had the best year we've ever had, I mean, would bonuses and compensation be part of that conversation?
100%. Yeah, we have a policy in place that when we separate a percentage of profits, and that goes to employees. So my partner and I, we'll set aside, whatever percentage of that a profit's going to be every year, and that is then divided. So everybody knows that they have a windfall potentially at the end of the year, and so everybody works towards that. But with that, if we didn't have that level of transparency, people wouldn't, they wouldn't feel like they could participate in the success of the agency. This way, you entice them, you get them, connected to the financial state of the agency, and everybody's kind of rolling in the same direction because they know that at the end of the day, there might be a pot of gold at the rainbow.
That's great. That's great. So sticking with team, Armando, in a conversation you and I had a couple of weeks ago, we talked about succession planning and kind of the what's next. So how do you think about that? You are a man of a certain age and want to do this forever, I'm sure. But how do you think about that? How do you think about the what's next, both from a talent identification, a training opportunity? So just share with us how you think about succession planning and a generation beyond, and so that the Access Agency is not just, with you and your partner.
Yeah. It's funny because that's one of the topics that we're going through right now. This 2024 was going to be the year where we're going to put a succession plan in place. And because we recently bought out Interpublic retained a small stake in our company. We actually just recently bought them out, and those shares are going to be held in reserve for another potential partner that we bring into the business. And we're looking for somebody that is, young, has a different perspective, again, that has that perspective about, looking beyond the obvious, that can bring us new kind of thinking around where the business should go in the future. We've got a couple of people that we're looking at. I'm looking at hopefully somebody that has, a book of business, an agency, perhaps has a line of business that is a little bit different than what we do, so it becomes additive to the agency, but still continues to help support the core business. So we're kind of in the middle of that, but we see that as something that's really, really critical. My partner and I, we're having discussions about whether eventually we want to sell. Do we want to simply, give the agency to somebody else to be able to manage it? Those are the kind of discussions that we're having now. We did a lot of that succession planning at Interpublic, so we've got a lot of good experience and some good kind of models that we're using in order to do that. But it's identifying, the right person that has a similar view, but perhaps has a little bit of a different perspective in terms of where the business might go in the future.
Is it your expectation you'll know it when you see it, or it'll just be perfect, or is it it's going to get close? This is the closest, and we're going to have to work together over a period of time. What's your hunch on how it's going to go down?
I mean, I don't think there's ever a silver bullet, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't think there's anything that's ever perfect. So I think we're going to have to get as close as we can possibly get. We have a couple of people that have actually had worked at Access, for years, and then decided to leave, and now have gone into, great new positions in their own agencies. And so we're looking at people that have some connection to us in some way or another, people that we've either mentored or sponsored ourselves. And now are doing well, and we want to kind of bring them back to the fold. So, I don't think it's going to be somebody that's perfect, but it's going to be somebody that largely kind of represents the same view that we have.
And probably not a stranger, probably somebody that there's some degree of separation, you're some line of sight on.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's critical, is to find somebody that we've had some relationship with, that we know how the person kind of, works and what their views are and what their kind of, their acumen is. I don't want to get in a situation where we bring somebody in and we spend a lot of time and effort and money, and that, the house of cards falls. I need to have somebody that I have some connection to be able to entrust in.
So have you decided on this path, or is selling still on the table?
I think it's still on the table. I don't know that it's necessarily our desired path at the moment. I think we still have a little more building to do before we get to that level of discussion. I've had, a number of I think positive inquiries over the last couple of years with some people that I've known for years that I think would be, potentially good partners. But we weren't, Carmen Lawrence is my partner. We weren't quite ready to let go yet. And I don't think that we're quite ready to let go at this moment either. I think we've got a couple of other areas we want to develop before we actually decide to simply separate from the business.
So on that question of, you think you have a little bit more building left to do. So how do you decide where to allocate sort of the resources of the business? I mean, we've already talked about, agency culture, investing in people, potentially building an affiliation network, integrating more into sort of general market. So how are you deciding sort of how to allocate your resources?
Yeah, I mean, I think, my view is some years ago, someone told me, 70% of your resources should go to where you're doing the best. And so 70% of our resources are going to the areas that are providing the greatest value, the greatest profit for the agency. That other 30% is money you can place a bet on. And so you got to place your bet wisely with that 30%. But you never walk away from the core. You invest in the core, and you take that 30% and you figure out exactly if there's enough of a bet to be able to actually produce something for you at the end of the day. So I'd say it's 70, 30, if you look at it that way, 70% into what we're currently doing, in reinvesting in that, doubling down, if you will, and then about 25 to 30% into new areas that we haven't really touched yet.
Hey, Armando, how are you defining success, both for yourself and for the firm? What is success?
Well, I mean, I think there's obviously, financial success. You run a business to make money. So, if you don't hit the right margins, then, it's not a successful business, and one that you should probably reassess if that's what you really, really should be doing. But I think the second level, to me, almost as important is it rewarding? Is it work that really means something in our community? I mentioned to you that aside from being, bicultural and bilingual, we kind of see ourselves as being ambassadors or evangelists for the marketplace. So when we do a campaign that really addresses some of the core community issues in the marketplace, that is a rewarding feeling, and that's the kind of stuff we want to do. So the work that we do, for example, for the National Kidney Foundation on health equity, that's a really important thing for us, and we're doing it with a lot of pride. The work that we do for the state of California with respect to natural resources, water, extreme heat, that's something that has real value for us. The work that we did for Kaiser, that's providing access to healthcare, that's an important thing for us. So picking clients that you really want to work on. I mean, I have today, thankfully, the luxury to be able to kind of pick and choose where we want to work, right? And so there are numbers of dozens of client opportunities every year that we pass on because it doesn't feel right. It's not something we really want to do. And we focus on the ones that we really think we can make a difference on and provide some value back into the community. That's, to me, is the most rewarding thing.
So I didn't hear you say, but as I would reflect on this conversation, your ability to retain talent is an amazing definer of success. And so to put words in your mouth, I think that's on that list, that you've done such a good job of figuring that out. I'm assuming that was intentional. Back to that first day of entrepreneurship, he says, I want to build a place that does great work, we make great money, but it's a place that great people want to stay. I'm assuming those were words that you would have said to yourself as you were building what it was going to become.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that we have done from day one throughout the entire 20 years that we've been in business is to find people that you want to work with, people that are committed like you are, and then want to stick around for the journey. And I think some of that comes out of politics as well, right? When you're working on a campaign, you're working with like-minded people that are committed, that their heart is in the cause, and they want to be there. I want to work with people that have similar kind of passion, people that want to be here, that want to work on these issues, that want to give back in some way or another. And when you identify and you hire those people and you help them throughout their professional career, they want to stay with you. And so that, to me, is, as I said before, it's a kind of a feather in my cap that I'm very proud of.
I mean, are there instances where it would be in the best interest of the employee to take an opportunity outside of the agency? And in those situations, how do you handle that when somebody comes to you to give you notice and they're someone who you rely on, they're one of your top performers? How do you handle their exit?
Yeah, I mean, I stand up and applaud, honestly. I mean, I'm the biggest cheerleader you're going to find when someone comes to me. I've never had an issue with somebody coming to me and say, hey, I've got this great opportunity at this other agency or at this organization or at this company, and I want to try to pursue it. I'm the first one that says, you really should do it. If you really want to do that, I'm certainly not going to stand in your way. I'm not going to complicate things. I mean, I want you to stay, but if you want to go, I think that, your own professional development and personal development is probably the utmost priority, and you should do it. So I'm the biggest cheerleader when people say, I'm going to go take something else on. And what happens is, and I mentioned it before, a lot of people, over the years, over 20 years, people leave my agency, and a lot of them come back after a couple of years because they've learned something new. They've, been invigorated by what they're doing. They're bringing a new skill level, and they're bringing it back to me because they feel comfortable in working with us at Access.
So have you had the occasion in that sponsorship mindset where someone's come to you, just exactly the way Arthi explained it, comes to you and you said, I don't think you're ready for that job, or I'm not sure that's the right fit. If you have a vantage point and have a perspective, is that a reality? Do those conversations, as that sponsor, to sort of speak a little bit of truth into the situation? How do you handle that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there have been times like that. There have been times when someone has come to me and said, "Hey, I think I'm going to take this position, and this is what I'm going to do." And then, they ask me for my, if nobody asked me for my point of view, I'm not going to give it to you. But if somebody asks me for the point of view, I'm going to be honest with them, and I'm going to be candid, and I'm going to say, I don't know if this is the right agency for you. I don't know if this is the right account for you. I don't know if you're going to be happy doing what you think you're going to be doing over there. I try to give them, my years of experience and say, maybe apply that filter and see if it actually is for you or if it isn't for you. So I don't have any, I have no concern about, providing that counsel. And a lot of times, there've been a couple of times where I've actually, not that I've meant to convince anybody to stay, but I've said something that people have kind of said, well, that probably makes a lot of sense. And they've decided to stay. Others have decided to go and have built careers that have, that have been wonderful and have done very, very well. But yeah, I mean, I try to counsel, just like I counsel my, my daughters. I try to counsel a lot of my young staff in terms of what I think they can do and what maybe they shouldn't be doing.
That's one of my probably my last question here is, how accessible are you to your junior staff, and especially in this sort of remote environment? How do you signal to them that your quote door is open for them to sort of ask you questions like that, these mentorship, sponsorship questions?
Yeah, I mean, that's on me. That's on me to be open. I mean, no one is just going to barge in my office or barge into my inbox, without an invitation, to be honest with you. So I'm very focused on making sure I provide that invitation. So for people to have that conversation, I'm typically not. I'm a pretty easygoing guy, and people feel comfortable talking to me. So it feels easy for people to do so. But I still think you need to invite people to do it and engage in conversation with employees. Understanding their family reality and what they want to do in the future is a very helpful kind of tool that I've used over the years to be able to develop those personal relationships. I feel like I have personal relationships with all my employees. They're just not employees. And I know that sounds, kind of cliche, but it's a fact. I mean, I have relationships with my employees. I value them as individuals before I value them as employees. And I think that kind of creates the paradigm, if you will, for the relationship from an executive to a staff person.
Yeah. So I want to wrap up, but I don't want to end on a downer, so I'm going to ask you a second question after this as well. So we haven't talked about mistakes. Entrepreneurial journey, amazing retention, great growth, disciplined in a marketplace, really cool team. But talk about some bumbles, talk about some mistakes, talk about some things that you did and what it said, damn, Armando, why did I do that? So share some perspective on that and what we can learn from that.
I mean, the biggest thing that I try to do, Bill, and I've tried my entire career, is don't take on too much. When people decide to take on more than they can handle, it's usually a negative environment for you. And so you have to be disciplined enough to know exactly what you can handle and what you can't handle. And I have had, instances in my career where I've decided to take on something that I really shouldn't have probably taken on. And I wasn't very successful at it because I didn't have the resources.
Did you know it at the time, or did you just know it at hindsight?
Yeah, of course. You get this little kind of gut feeling that, maybe this isn't right, but, maybe I can get away with it. And so, and everything kind of falls flat and you realize, God, I should have listened to my gut. I knew this wasn't quite right for me. So I think I always try to, counsel people, entrepreneurs in my sphere. It's good to look beyond, the obvious. It's good to take chances, but also be also understanding what your limitations are, because you can fall flat and it can cost you a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of reputation.
How do you prop up that little voice so years ago it wasn't as loud, and hopefully now that little voice has gotten louder and a little more demanding? How do you prop it up so that voice serves you well?
It's funny because I think that voice has gotten less loud over my years, because I think I've learned how to look at these opportunities and kind of put them away or pursue them a little bit easier. I don't struggle with them as much as I used to earlier on in my career, when you're hungry and you want to do more, you want to impress your bosses and supervisors, so you take everything on. to me, that voice was much louder back then than it is today. Today, it seems to be kind of satisfied, with where we're at, and kind of my sense of understanding the situation in front of me. So it's less today than it was. It doesn't mean that it's gone, because there are times where I still look at something and I go, God, do I really want to do this? Is this really something that is going to benefit us? And you got to make a decision. You got to make a tough decision. And I check with people, and I get counsel from folks as well. But yeah, today I think it's a little bit, and probably just experience focus. It's just less loud than it used to be.
Yeah. So last question as we wrap up. And again, thanks for the generosity of your time. What are you excited about? What are you in awe of moving forward, looking around those corners that we talked about, looking to the future? What are you excited about? What are you in awe of as we look towards the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a resource perspective, I'm super excited about AI, artificial intelligence, and how that kind of is going to redefine the relationship between agencies and clients. There's two ways to look at it from my perspective. You can do an AI type campaign with a client on board, or you can use AI as a resource for your agency to help build up your tools. And so I'm learning every single day more and more about AI, and I'm coming away with the conclusion that it's going to be a transformative type of strategy, a method that is going to reshape the way we kind of do marketing. So it's something that is clearly important to not only to me, it's important to people on my staff. We're teaching people about it. As I said, we had that kind of lunch and learn, if you will, a couple of weeks ago about AI. So I'm very excited about AI. The other thing that I'm still excited and passionate about is the Hispanic market. I mean, I just think that the market continues to grow. Its influence, forget about the purchasing power. Everybody knows about the purchasing power. But the influence that it has across entertainment, sports, and food and movies, it's just pervasive. That to the point where it's become ubiquitous. And so I think I'm excited about that, because it wasn't like that 20 years ago when I first started talking about this. Back then, it was still kind of a nascent type of idea. Today, it's everywhere, and so I get really excited when I see it. I look at my daughters, who are two of them are in communications and marketing. Both of them are publicists, and I've tried to kind of instill in them that opportunity with the Hispanic market, and they've embraced it too. So I get excited about seeing how their careers develop based on the same premise that my career kind of flourished.
That's awesome, Armando. Thank you for this time. Thank you for the generosity and sharing and perspective, and it's wonderful to talk to an owner that's sort of got a lot of clarity and focus, and so really appreciates that. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it, Bill. Thank you so much.
Wow. So, Bill, thank you for inviting Armando onto the show. I think he raised so many interesting points, and many of which we haven't really covered. Some of which, I guess, we haven't really covered on this podcast. But one thing that stood out to me, and I just have to say, is his conversation with the founder of the streaming company, and the bravery that founder had in admitting that he was not busy, right? That he had time to meet with people. Obviously that comes from a place of being, secure in your position, in your job. But I think I've seen founders get so caught up in wanting to be seen as important and impressive, and just, show off how hard they're working. But actually, the research shows that being overly busy actually hurts creativity, hurts problem solving, productivity, efficiency, and actually reducing workloads actually helps enhance all of this. So I think that's just an important point for founders to remember. And I wonder how many founders would also extend that to their employees, because it's also true for them.
So it was so refreshing to hear that. It was like a splash of cold water when he said that, because it jolted me back to a construct that I hold so true. And I've thought a lot about this is if you go to a cocktail party and I say, so, hey, Arthur, what's up? How you doing? Oh, busy. Never been busier. I got so much busyness going on in my life. Okay. And I learned through a coach that as a leader of my firm, that almost the best time that I could spend is sitting back in my chair, just thinking, and maybe reading an article and reflecting on that article and thinking, as opposed to input, output, and taking that time to think. And I put it back into that cocktail party paradigm. If I were to walk into a cocktail party and say, well, Bill, how you doing? Well, I had the most amazing day of thinking today. I would just feel weird as hell saying that, even though anybody that knows anything, as you just pointed out, how amazing would my firm must be that I spent a day of thinking, or I had a really good portion of a day of thinking. So yeah, I think if we don't measure ourselves on busyness and we measure ourselves other ways, we'll find that space and freedom and clarity. And that's where good ideas come from. That's where we find the conviction to let go someone that we need to let go. That's where we find the conviction to double down or cut bait on a vertical. That's where that comes from. It rarely comes from this input output dynamic. So I love that that refreshing glass of water that sort of reminds me of how important that is. And I loved it that he brought it up.
Yeah, and I oftentimes the culture we've built around work, and so this is maybe a good segue to talk about culture because that was a big part of the conversation. But the culture the traditional culture that's been built around work is at odds with a lot of modern research about productivity and creativity. Yeah, and I don't think that many founders, many companies for that matter, have really caught up to that. I mean, the closest we've seen, and I don't think this is true anymore, is Google, right? So when they, increasingly, there's research that shows that a 20-minute nap can do more to increase creativity and productivity than whatever your fifth cup of coffee or, whatever the shortcuts that people were taking. So, I don't know if when Google added nap pods to their offices, I don't know if those still exist. I want to know how many founders would come on our podcast and say, yeah, I take a nap every day at 2:00. I find that I am able to be, refreshed. And how many of them would be okay with their employees saying, yeah, no, at 2:00, I take a nap. They would have no problem with their employees saying, oh, at 2:00, I walk down to Starbucks and get my afternoon coffee and then I walk back. But if they spent that same time doing a 20-minute nap, would that make them uncomfortable, even though the research backs the nap, not the coffee?
I think that the honesty I don't think we'd like the honesty that we didn't get if we ever asked that question. But yeah, I think there would be tremendous value in that. I tried a little bit of a nap experience. There's a senator that I worked for that he napped 20 minutes every day from 2 to 4, tried to squeeze it in between 2 and 3 because he was he was doing, big, long 12-hour, 7 o'clock breakfast, 7 o'clock boats. And he needed that. And it's a game changer. But even that, it just shutting up and reading and thinking is almost as good as taking a nap.
Yeah. And like I said, I think it's important for the founders, but I also think it's important to think about
for the team,
in terms of creativity. Yeah, for the team, right? Yeah. I don't think some of this stuff shouldn't just be reserved for the founders. So that goes into the conversation we had about talent and culture. And Armando, I think he should be really proud, right, of the longevity and the loyalty of his team. I think that's critical for creative services firms. But here's my unsolicited advice. And this isn't just to Armando. I think this has been a recurrent theme in some of our conversations is sort of downplaying the role of compensation in retaining and recruiting talent, right? And of course, if you're a boutique agency, you're not going to compete on compensation alone. Your culture, autonomy, the ability to provide remote work. I mean, these are all cards that they can and should play. But I think we need to be careful about not creating cultures where employees will feel shame about asking for money. And actually, Bill, did you see, I sent you a LinkedIn video from Scott Galloway
talking about we got to be transparent about money. Yeah.
That we need to move, and we are, like, culturally, we are, many states require that you have salary bands on job descriptions and on open recs, and that the jobs that don't include those actually have a much lower application rate or response rate than the ones that do include those. And I think Armando said it himself, right? This is a business. The goal is to make money. And I guarantee you, if any of his employees, no matter how loyal they are, if they won some kind of jackpot tomorrow, I mean, they would leave this job, right? So there's a culture towards more transparency around money. So I just think we should be mindful of that.
Yeah, and we've tried to talk about this in the context, or I tried to talk about it as a basket or a pie or something like that. And so, and that's basically what that would be: what's the basket of retention? What are the things that you can put in a basket for an employee in order to create a whole experience within your firm? I don't think comp is smaller than the 50, than half of the size of that basket. No, but I don't think it's like 80 to 90% either. I think there's lots of other things that you can put in that basket. And I don't know if you and I exactly agree on that numerical value, but I think that when I was making those decisions was try to be really transparent with a team. Here's what we can do. Here's what we can't do, but I can do all of this as well. We can talk about sort of things around freedom, if you will, and workplace and projects. So I think that there is, if it's the only thing in the basket, I think that's a fool's errand, and you'll never compete because you're creating an incentive for people to find the next bigger number. But I think if you create more of a holistic basket, I think that's the sweet spot. Recognizing that we can't be naive, that we can't pay minimum wage, and you got to be competitive. But competitive, as you said, is a band, and maybe you don't need to be at the top of the band. Maybe you can be near the middle or the bottom of the band, as well as these other features and benefits in the basket.
I mean, this also goes back again to research, and again, I really think there's so much great research on employee retention and recruitment these days. And there's a lot of research that shows that, a lot of people are willing to take a pay cut for remote work. So I absolutely don't think that money is the number one driver for a huge chunk of the workforce, but to ignore that it's a consideration, right? I mean,
you can't be naive.
That people aren't doing.
I don't think he was advocating that. I just think he just sort of. I think firms like his, and to a lesser extent mine, we're limited and sometimes on what you can do, and that is an advocacy for growth. That's an advocacy for scale because it creates more optionality. Mm-hmm. But then, what are you giving up? What's the owner giving up on the other side? So great conversation, right. And it's somewhere in that important, but not the only important is the way I kind of settle down on that one.
So there were just two quick other call outs that I just wanted to mention. And one is, Armando mentioned sort of creating sort of an affiliate network, and, there's no shortage of those, and they have some excellent, agencies involved like PRIO, PRGN, IPRX. I mean, there's so many, and I'm not knocking the model, right? Like I think it serves a purpose and in some cases can be really successful, but I just want to caution agency owners that there are some real limitations. I have yet to see an affiliate network really be taken seriously in a multinational, multi-million-dollar pitch against a big holding company.
A global firm, you mean?
Yes, yeah.
Global firm versus hodgepodge, or not hodgepodge, but collective.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and that's a tough mountain. And I don't really know that that's a good allocation of resources, is to try to build some sort of affiliation network that could go up against like a Burson or something. The other piece that stood out to me that I just wanted to point out was, putting your head down around the competition. Like, I agree, don't be distracted by every shiny new offering or every new sort of productized service that your competitors may be offering. But I think market situational awareness is what we do for our clients. And I don't buy that it would not be a valuable tool for agencies to be aware of what their competitors, both their peer competitors and their aspirational competitors, are doing.
Yeah. So just two quick anecdotes on that. On the collective or the grouping, I've been in three of them, and my biggest takeaway on that is that you get out what you put in, and you gotta lean in. You can't just you gotta participate, whether it's as business development driver or whether you're on collective pitches. You just gotta lean in, and you gotta be actively participate. Hold your breath, cross your fingers, and maybe it'll pay off. And rarely, back to your asset allocation point, rarely does it work. But if it's going to, it's all about leaning in and not just sort of being a passive passenger on that one. I get Armando's point about market situational intelligence, and I think about, I was caught something just about professional bowlers. You never watch professional bowlers watching the other guy. They're always kind of their heads down and they're sort of blocking their eyes. And what I've heard a commentator say once is they just don't want to learn any of the bad habits of that other guy, or the way they do their bowl, or the way they do their stroke. And I don't know if golfers do the same thing or not. I think, yes, it's situational awareness is important, but I also think you got to have a pretty strong culture and discipline and sense of self, so that you're not, oh, wow, they did this, let's go do that. Or we did this, or they did this, let's go rent. So you can't really run around. So I get it. I agree with you. I think probably he might look more than he said he did, but I know I kept an eye on what people were doing. But I also didn't want their behavior to shape my behavior. I wanted to just know what was going on. Just got to be careful is my sense on that.
Yeah. I mean, like they said, you don't want to be chasing every shiny new object. But I will say, in my experience, founders who tend to put blinders on about their competitors are sometimes delusional about where they stand in the marketplace.
Yeah,
I have had founders say things to me like, we're the only ones that are getting this kind of, business media coverage. It's like, you're not. And then they wouldn't understand why they couldn't scale. And they're like, but we're the only ones doing this. Why aren't we winning?
More recognized. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, because what you're doing is not that unique. And I will say most of the large agency owners are so acutely aware of what's happening in their competitive realm.
Yeah. And I don't think, but can you get it at a conference? Can you get it? Maybe it doesn't need to be back to that sort of that media diet. Yeah. I don't know if I need 20% of my day or my week or my month, whatever, looking at what others are doing. I feel like I could go to a really well curated conference and see case studies and models and be curious and get fed that way. I don't think it has to be real time. You have a reaction to that? Can I get it at conferences?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on your size and how big your competitive set is probably. I know a lot of CEOs that read the trades every day, right? Yeah. I mean, they look at, PR Week, Provoke, Ad Age, and they want to have this pulse on what's happening around them, not only for their own business, but for their talent. Like, who are they, who are they attracting? Is it keeping up with, where the market's going? As a news junkie myself, and a trade junkie for our business, I mean, I think there's huge value in that. And sometimes I just skim headlines, and other times, I think I've gotten some, like the Ad Age article I mentioned about this movement away from agency and what that means for pricing models, right? Do you really? I mean, that's something that if I were an agency owner, I would want to know that if my larger, brethren were trying to move away from hourly based pricing and they were finding sort of different tricks to do that, I don't want to be the last person to that party.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a gret conversation. I think the advice is keep your eye on it, but you need to keep your eye on so many other things. So I think it's a challenge. Maybe that's a newsletter we should write. The perfect dosage of all these critical inputs that people need to have in a newsletter every day.
Yeah, I think that's great.
As dictated by us, the perfect dosage.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody. Great conversation with Armando. Thanks for joining us on the Heart and Science of Creative Leadership podcast. We'll continue bringing you owners, listening to their fascinating stories and what they have to share. So thanks so much, Arthi. Thank you as always for joining us.
Of course.